Howdy y'all, I am Ice Gold, and today we're going to be doing, I guess a prediction is the best way for me to say it, but yeah, a prediction for what I think the PvP meta is going to look like once the update drops. Test Realm is officially out. From what I hear, it is extremely buggy and hardly playable at all. The new Gauntlet is, like, you can't go in with a team yet, to my knowledge, but, yeah, ain't that fun. But given all of the new spell teasers and all of the ones that we saw tease, those are going to be the only ones. So there weren't new fusions in the test realm, which I was kind of disappointed to hear, but oh well. But yeah, we've got all of the matchups as per usual. This is just what I think is going to be the meta, what I think it's going to look like after this update drops on live. And I mean, you know, the shadow spell changes have done so much, and it's really going to be interesting to see. I mean, y'all know I don't really upload PvP to this channel, but I keep up with it, and because I mean, who knows? Who knows? You know, maybe they'll fix their issues someday. I mean, I'm not really holding my breath for that, but maybe they will, and I want to be around when they do. So let's go ahead and just dive into things. So, Balance versus Death, the first matchup here. I think just because chromatic weaknesses are not changing with Balance, we are still going to see this probably in the safe category, which is where Cass and I put it last time. So, starting off with a safe matchup, who could have guessed? Balance versus Fire, though. Last time, Cass and I said that this was a likely Fire matchup, but with FFA, because it's like the main thing with this matchup is King Art is your hit as a Fire, and balances have become more prone to packing Rainbow Serpent, and that can really help against a Fire who uses King Art, because it'll put a 60 weakness on the Fire Wizard, like a 60 chromatic weakness, and that can be very, very hard to deal with. But the way I see things, with how Fire is now, what you can do is, with a new FFA, you can Fuel, then you can FFA, then you can Brim, and just like that, you have a 35 trap, a 30 trap, and then also a 55 trap, and you've done a lot of damage in the process. So at that point, your balanced opponent is probably down to about 8k HP, and at this point, a King Art might just kill, and that, I think, takes Rainbow Serpent out of the equation entirely, because even if it doesn't, like, you're still gonna be, like let's say the King Art does 7k. The Balance Wizard is still on 1,000 health. Like, that's at the point where you could just hit through that 60 weakness. It's like, if you pull the hit for it, and be fine. So I think I'm going to put this in the safe category. I don't know if I'm going to say it's too safe, but safe Fire for this matchup, which is, it's good that Balance has a really safe counter now. So that's really good. Balance versus Ice. Last time Cass and I put this in the lean section. I personally do think that there's been a little bit of reversion back in favor of the Balance. I mean, there is a combo that you can do as an Ice that can get you a W, but I think it's sort of expanded a little bit for the Balance. It's nothing too crazy. Like, I remember we put this just like on the border of lean and likely, but I think with how balances have begun to play, you know, like, especially if a balance packs weakness counters now, we're going to see this matchup expand a little. Plus, Gaze of Fate is a new type deal. You're going to see balances pack in probably a bunch of those, and that means balance will not lose the Bubble War as easy. So there is that to worry about as well. I don't think it's going to affect the matchup too much. I think this goes from maybe balance plus 10-ish is where we might have put this last time, to balance plus 15 to 20. So again, nothing too crazy, but definitely some expansion on the margin. Balance versus Life. This one we put as very safe for the balance last time, and with how life is changing, and like all of these matchups are going to shift a lot, but I think with how life is changing, I think this is probably going to expand, and it's already pretty safe for the balance. So balance versus life, especially if the balance is, you know, weaving storm, peck and heal counters, that type of deal, this could be very, very strong. So balance versus life, still safe balance. Balance versus myth is the next one up, and that's balance's other bad matchup. So here we have, in the last tier list, Cass and I put this as safe myth, and I think I'm going to say the same, except it's expanded a little bit. I think it's safer than the fire matchup, probably much safer as a matter of fact, but yeah, I mean, with Barbarian Saga being a thing now, and like Myth Dots and all that, it's like Myth can actually pressure balance pretty well. And I mean, you can still obviously just blade like balance like Myths do. So I think that this matchup has expanded in favor of the Myth. So it's always good to see balance sort of take some hits. So next up we have the balance versus storm matchup, and this one, it's kind of in limbo. We don't know how Catch of the Day is going to look, and it's Cass and I put this as Tilt Storm last time, because we thought, you know, Storm was like barely favored, but I kind of disagreed with him a little bit there, and I think with how things are looking, I'm gonna say that it goes at least back to likely balance, because Storm does have some good cards, but there's been a lot of speculation that they could be losing Catch of the Day, and by losing I mean it's getting nerfed pretty severely. Like, I've seen the devs throw around 25% blades before. So if that becomes a thing, then this matchup, it becomes much harder to pressure a balance as a Storm. So I think this one is going to flip, and I think that balance is going to have a commanding lead over Storm. But Storm obviously still being Storm, very volatile school, and I think that they can absolutely still win. They have a very good chance, but I do think right now they have less of a chance than Ice. I'm gonna be real. So we'll call it maybe like balance plus 20. So there's that. Next on the list is Death versus Myth. Last time we put this in the safe category. I think like that is where it's going to go again, but I don't think there's been too much in terms of or actually no, I think it is going to expand, because the thing with this matchup from before was that Myth versus Death, like Death could bring it down a little bit with you know, like having a straight up win condition if they can get a buffed Reader off. Like Reader as a kill shot, very, very strong. So with that kind of being out in favor of, you know, like the new one shad Grim Reader, I think that we're going to see some expansion in favor of the Myth here, just because Death doesn't have that path to victory anymore. They don't have, you know, like they don't have like an insane hit to just sort of eradicate a Myth with if a Death is able to get the Myth low enough on health. So that, I think, is going to push it maybe here. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely swung in favor of the Myth, I'll say that, just with the loss of Grim Reader alone. So what's next? Death versus Storm. This is still going to be very safe for the Death. Probably safer than it was before, I'm going to be real, because it's like, as a Storm, you have to worry about Headless and Grim now, so have fun with that. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard to really do much as a Storm in this matchup, and yeah, like Death has a very commanding lead over you in that. So, safe Death in that regard. Fire versus Death is the next one up, and I mean, Fire's getting pretty, like, strongly buffed this update. So, I think we're going to see this. I mean, it was already safe Fire. I think we're going to see it place similarly, except it's going to be safer for the fire than it would be for the balance in the balance matchup. So yeah, a little bit of expansion, but ultimately, like, it didn't really expand that much. So fire versus death, still safe for the fire. Fire versus life is an interesting one. Because this is one where you just can't really do much as the fire. Like, I don't know. I think this is still one of the worst matchups in the game, because fire, in a lot of cases, needs setup to thrive. And against a life, you can't do that. So, yeah, fire versus life. Yeah, I think we're going to say that is very safe for the life wizard here. But there is kind of a dynamic with fire from above. If you can, like, I don't know, use the traps quick enough. Maybe, I don't know. But it's like you can set up some good pressure as a fire. It's just it gets countered. And if the life has the centaur in hand, then, you know, good luck with that. So, life versus fire. Gonna say safe life, like I did before. And it's probably also still going to be the third worst matchup in the game, let's be honest. So next on the list, fire versus myth. This is an interesting one. Cass and I said it was safe last time, but I think I'm going to bring it back down into the likely category, just because myth and blading and all that, it's like you see myths do that, and it can, like, you have to outpace a myth PvEing you as a fire, and that can be done, but it's like you really need to be on top of your game. Like, you need to maybe counter some of their blades with impair up until you can get yourself a surge, and then throw a combo. But yeah, I mean, fire versus myth, it's still favoring the fire by a good bit, just not as much as it was, just with the way that myths have begun to play. So there is that, and fire does have better trap spells now, especially with FFA, so there you go. Fire versus myth, I'm going to say, like, it's seen some reduction, but ultimately still favors the fire quite nicely. Next on the list, fire versus storm. Yeah, without a doubt. This, I mean, yeah, I don't think it's going to be safer than the death versus storm matchup, but yeah, I am going to call it still very safe for the storm, for obvious reasons. So there you have that. Then we have ice versus death. This is an interesting one. Cass and I put it as likely ice last time, and to be honest with you, I don't know if that holds up. I think we've seen a little bit of reduction, and I think death has gained a little bit in this matchup. But ultimately, yeah, I think ice is going to have the edge over death. Yeah, it's not by too much, and it's gone down a little just with how, like, Fireweave has really shaken stuff up. So it's like you can't set up shields for anything. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, this is kind of just a game of who has better stats, and death has better stats. So it kind of just comes down to, after that, it's like who uses their hanging effects better. And I think ice does that sort of by default. So they're favored, but just not by as much as we initially thought. So I think that after the update, this is going to be just down to lean ice. So there's that. Ice versus fire, yeah, this one definitely going way over here. And as a matter of fact, well, no, not quite on that. Yeah, I mean, just, it's like, you have to always have the pips to counter whatever a fire is doing as an ice. And a lot of the times, you just will not. And dot spam will outpace your Tuarets, and that's just the whole issue. So yeah, I do think that fire versus ice is one of the worst matchups in the game. But I don't think it's fully one-sided. I think it's maybe fire plus 65-ish. I don't know. It's something pretty mental. Like, I would call it probably like 85 to 15, so like plus 70. So it doesn't quite get into the one-sided range, but it's definitely just like the second worst matchup in the game. And following this up, we have the worst matchup in the game, with Life versus Ice. This is making its return to the one-sided tier, because Ice cannot weave Storm, because otherwise they will lose to Fire worse. And yeah, it's like at that point, yeah, you're not beating a Life as an Ice. It's like Burrowing Bane. I am actually not entirely sure on that, but if Burrowing Bane does become a bomb dot, then there's some leeway. But for the moment, we're not sure on that. Hunting Worm, we know, is staying the same. So ultimately, and with how like hit and heals have become more stacked towards the heal, it's like if a Life Wizard is carrying infection counters too, then that really makes it one-sided. So yeah, as an Ice, you have no hope of beating a Life. I'm just going to leave it at that. Next on the list is Ice versus Myth. And this one, Cass and I gave it Lean Myth last time, but I think that's going to expand quite a bit once the update drops. I think we're going to see it really expand for the Myth, just because, like, Shad Spell Diff and just, you know, having a regular dot, even if it is just Barbarian Saga that's doing that, is going to be extremely strong. And Ice is really going to need to keep up with that somehow. It's just, I don't know how we're going to do it. Ultimately, though, while we still have Frostbite, I do think that Ice does stand at least a decent chance, but it's still a very unfavorable matchup. So, Myth versus Ice, probably going to be in the likely column once the update drops. Next on the list, we've got Ice versus Storm. Last time I put this in the likely column for the Ice, and I think I'm going to be doing that again, but there's definitely a reduction. It's like if a Storm does play the matchup right, they can definitely win. Like if you bury Owl in Shrike, that's kind of unbeatable. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, yeah, I mean, Ice just sort of thrashes Storm around if they're not spamming a bunch of berries. But if they do spam a bunch of berries, then and like you don't have infections, that type of deal, then that's a problem. But infections are at least enough to keep up with the healing. It's just the berry owl spam type deal, that's when things get kind of bad. So I think for that reason, we're going to see Ice versus Storm continue to be in the likely column, but definitely not as safe as it should be. Next up, Life versus Death. This one, I think, is going to... I think this one's going to change a lot. I think we're going to see Death finally be able to counter Life at long last. And if Burrowing Bane does become like a bomb dot, then we're going to see it probably end up like, I don't know, here, maybe. Like Death plus 15. So I think after the update, we are going to see Death finally take this one back at long last. But for right now, Life is still on top. But yeah, once the update is out, I think Death is going to take the lead back, and like as they rightfully should. So there you have it. There's our second flip of the video. Kind of crazy how most of these are stagnant, but but yeah, Death versus Life. That one Shad Grim is going to help out a lot with damage, and I think as long as the Death just keeps a ton of infects on, then they can at least sort of combat things like Goat Monk and Hunting Worm, that type of deal. And since Lifes aren't like weaving fire, not using too many shield counters, a Death can also set up Dumoni, which it will be very, very good for them. So Death versus Life, once the update drops, finally going to swing back in favor of the Death. Next up is Life versus Myth, and this one's a little interesting. It's just sort of like Myth can't really I mean, with like PvE, dude, because I don't know. It's like if the myth is like carrying Triton and like heal counters just in general, like I've seen more myths start to do these days, then I think we could finally see this matchup flip back in favor of the myth, which does kind of anti-counter, but hey, what can you say? But I do think that if the myth is carrying dot and hot counters, like most are these days, we can see it come back. However, life is still the life school and can really just out heal. So I think as a myth, you've just really got to go all in on the PvE and just pray, I guess, and maybe set up a gym if possible. So there you have that. Yeah. And I mean, if a life does scarecrow a myth that's doing PvE, then they can just King Art. And although it does give the life traps that they can feed off of, like, still, I mean, a buffed hit from a myth is gonna do mass. So yeah, I mean, just as long as the myth stays on top of their counters, I think they should be fine. So yeah, another flip, and I'm honestly kind of excited for that. So it's like a nerf to life and a buff to myth is what it took for us to get here. That's what I'm getting at. Next up, Storm versus Life. This is an interesting one. Cass and I put it in the likely tier last time. I think that we are going to see it go back into the safe column. And it's not too much of an expansion for the Storm, but I do think that's where we're going to see it. Just because Storm does counter life pretty hard, but it's like if the life is prepared, then they can kind of slow the Storm down, that type of deal. So Storm versus Life, safe again for the Storm, but it's probably going to remain over here towards the left of it. So it's not too terribly safe. Next up is Storm versus Myth, the final matchup on the list. So what do we got? The last time we put it as safe for the Storm, but I think, because Storms carry shield counters, so Myth can't really gen like that. But if Catch is getting nerfed, then we're going to see it swing back. I don't think it's going to favor the Myth necessarily, but I do think we are going to see this matchup swing pretty hard in favor of Myth. It's not going to be enough to flip it, but I do think that Myth is going to be more favored in this matchup following the update. So we will just have to see with that, but for now, these are all the matchups. So this is where I think things are going to go once the new update does drop. And obviously, again, these are predictions. Nothing is set in stone. This is not what I think about the meta right now either. Like, definitely not if I'm favoring death over life. But yeah, ultimately, I mean, how would this shake out with the ranking? I mean, Balance, I feel like, is going to be on top. It's favored in 4 matchups. But then after that will be Fire. And then, yeah, so 1 Balance, 2 Fire, 3 Myth, maybe. Like, Myth is really going to climb with these shad changes and just how their mechanics are being reworked. So I think Myth is going to climb. We're going to see Myth probably be number 3 again. That's how I think it's going to go. And then 4th, I don't know. Like, Life kind of loses a lot of these, but they're still so good at healing. And even if Hunting Worm stays the same, I can't really put Life below 4, because it's like all of these other schools are going up. But if a life is sort of left unchecked, then they can really just like heal forever. So I think I'll put life at 4. And then at 5th, what's even left? 5th, what is it? Storm, Myth, and Ice. So 5, or not Myth, but Storm, Death, and Ice. 5th place, I think, is going to go to Storm. Just because it's like, it does have a couple, it's got 3 favorite matchups. One of them's a swing matchup. But yeah, and then it has a good chance in its 2 losing matchups outside of Death. So yeah, Storm I think is going to go number 5, and then 6 I think I'm going to give to Death. It's got 2 very good matchups, loses 4 as per usual. Yeah, I think that's where I'm going to put it. I think we're going to say Death 6, and then Ice, unfortunately, is going to remain at the bottom of the barrel, as it usually is. So yeah, Ice at 7. It's got a swing matchup here where it's favored, and then it's kind of favored against Storm, but even this one is volatile, so the Ice has really got to like play on their game and just like be locked in. It's like you can't turn your brain off in any matchup as an Ice. So yeah, ultimately I think that's our list. 1 balance, 2 fire, 3 myth, 4 life, 5 storm, 6 death, 7 ice. That's how I think it's going to look after the update drops, but time will tell. Obviously, you know, the update's not out yet, so some things could be very different. Test also just dropped this week, so there's bound to be changes happening there. But for now, that's going to wrap up. Thank y'all for watching. I've been Ice Gold. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave like 50 comments for the algorithm. My Discord is down in the description if you want to chat with me some more. And I will see y'all later.